cybercrime. We're going to take a look at a couple popular cybercrime attacks, what those impacts look like to your business, and then some dangerous IT practices that you should probably avoid that unfortunately you might not be at the moment. And we'll also show you some ways to combat ransomware. And then we've got a great demo showing you some ways in which you can implement a higher level of IT to security to really lock down your company. Unfortunately, the growth in ransomware is a worldwide crisis, and this year the business is going to be valued at $6 trillion. That's T trillion, which is to me astonishing, considering that this thing really just got going back in 2015. So it's a big problem, and we're certainly seeing it here in Philadelphia. I would say 9 out of 10 phone calls I get from folks that are not doing business with us are unfortunately people that have had successful ransomware attacks, and they're looking for security help. So why the rise in cybercrime? Like, what's going on here? Well, simply put, cybercrime really pays, and unfortunately, it really pays big. And, you know, criminals are going to go where the easy money is. And unfortunately, the cyber threat and attacks are getting more sophisticated. They're using more clever techniques from a technology perspective, and they're really taking advantage of the fact that you have a lot of home workers due to COVID-19. Everyone's shifted to remote work. Cybercrimes become a software package that's pre-made that any criminal can purchase on the dark web. And then as long as they have a list of email addresses, they can use this pre-made software package and send it out to their email list and see who falls prey. The person that sent the criminal that sent the email out, they make a little money if ransomware is collected, and also the software provider, they make a little money. It's almost like a cyber criminal syndicate software bureau now, much like, remember the days when we outsourced our payroll to a software service. It's exactly the same thing. Andrea, I'm noting there are some people in the lobby trying to get in.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. It's one attendee for some reason. It's not letting them in. I'm trying to troubleshoot it here.
All right, thank you. The cybercrime as a service is essentially a syndicate of criminals that have hired experienced cyber programmers. And a lot of this criminal activity is being state sponsored by specific countries overseas. And they're using today artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automated scripting. And just a recent hack that took place in the United States on-premise exchange servers was almost all done without human touching, all done via very sophisticated scripting. Taking place on every exchange server around the country. So who are the leading targets? Well, unfortunately, you are. If you own a small business or you're responsible for managing a small business, the criminals are coming after you. And there's a reason why. SMBs don't have large IT staffs and they don't have large IT budgets. So these are the folks the cyber criminals are coming after. You need your data. You're willing to pay ransomware if your data is encrypted. And they're just taking advantage of the fact that you have a lot of remote home workers that are using their own home PCs and simply don't know better. There are a lot of impacts if a cyber crime does take place in your business. There's an emotional toll and an operational toll and a financial toll. And, you know, from an emotional perspective, I have met and seen CEOs, COOs, CFOs, anyone at a C level that's actually gone through a ransomware attack where their data's been encrypted and they're contemplating having to pay a ransomware of $100,000 to $1 million. And I've seen the emotional toll it's taken on them. You know, you literally become humiliated with the prospect of having to tell your customers, your vendors, and your clients, and your employees rather, about it. It's not fun. And then of course every night you're worrying whether or not your backups are sufficiently set up, properly set up, that you're going to be able to recover your data without paying a ransomware. So it's not a fun place to be, and you definitely don't want to be going through it. And unfortunately, there's also an operational toll. Even if you have good backups and you end up not having to pay $1 of ransomware, If that's the case, I mean, that's a good thing. Obviously you don't want your policy to have to pay out. But at the same point, you still have to recover your servers. Typically, you have to reimage all of your company PCs, and you have to do all this because the bad guys got in your network, and you don't know where they've been. You don't know what software they've left in the network, and so that they would have persistent access in your network. So you literally rebuild your whole network. And so what's this mean to you? Well, typically it means your company is without its IT systems for a week to 2 weeks. Can you imagine not having access to your core applications to run your line of business? It's really scary, and I have seen this over and over. It's real, and you need to anticipate what the operational toll of losing your IT for a couple of weeks is, and that leads us right into the third category, which is financial toll. As owners, all we're thinking about is how do we grow our business? How do we make our business more profitable? How do we make it our services more sticky and satisfy our clients better? And while we're thinking about that, all that gets pulled out from under you when you're going through a ransomware attack. Whether you're rebuilding or negotiating to pay the ransomware, you're not growing your business. You're not focused on your business. And imagine the loss of productivity of all of your employees not having access to IT for a week or two. And then consider also that there's going to be a forensic report that's going to be submitted to your insurance company, and more than likely you're submitting to your bank, or you're submitting to auditors in your industry. Our business here, we have an SSAE 18 SOC 2 Type 2 attestation, and if anything were to happen in here from a cyber forensics issue, I would have to share that in the attestation review with the auditors, and that's going to be a footnote on the report. And obviously this is not stuff you want in a footnote on a report, whether you're getting going for HIPAA compliance, or we have some defense contractors that have NIST and CMMC audits. We have nursing homes and hospitals that have HIPAA audits. We have credit unions and bank clients that have either state bank regulators or federal bank regulators visiting them every year. You do not want these kinds of things noted on your audited reports. So any way you look at this, a cyber attack is a bad thing. It's something you don't want to go through, and you want to avoid it at all cost. So what are some of the common and emerging cyber attack methods? Let's just take a look at a couple. And there are plenty. So, unfortunately, like, what is ransomware? Well, ransomware is essentially a piece of software that gets loaded on your network. And once it's on your network, it lets the cyber criminals get in and start snooping around to find out, hey, where are your data files, where are your accounting files, your HR files, where's anything that might be of interest or value to you as a business person. And then they encrypt them. And they encrypt them, they hold on to the encryption key. And then once they've encrypted everything, including hopefully they're able to encrypt your backups, once everything's encrypted, then you get this orange little sign on your screen saying, hey, all your files have been encrypted and you have 23 hours to pay us a ransom. So a couple things can go on then. You can start thinking about, hey, are my backups any good, and am I going to be able to not pay the ransom? Or, oh my gosh, my backups are no good, and I do have to pay the ransom. But any way you look at it, you're being extorted. And what's worse, what's taking place now is they're not always going, the cyber criminals aren't always going to give you all your data back. They might actually take some of your worst data that you would never want shared and send it to your local newspaper. Or we've seen other things like this, or send it to your an industry trade association. So these are the kinds of things they're doing now to get more leverage to have you pay them, even if you have good backups. So one of the brand new ransomware attacks that you just saw on the news last week, and that's why we chose this one, is called a supply chain attack. And perhaps you heard of a company called Kaseya. Kaseya is a company that managed service providers like AMP operate to manage all their customers' PCs and servers. AMP, we don't use Kaseya software, fortunately, so we didn't go through the last supply chain attack. But what the bad guys do is try to attack the supply chain software, coming in the back door, coming into that third-party vendor software, and then once they're in there, they have access to all the managed service providers and all the managed service providers' clients. So just one attack could give them access to thousands of companies, and that's exactly what happened with the Kaseya attack. That single attack gained them access to thousands of servers and hundreds of thousands of PCs. So this is a very efficient attack, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it. There's also zero-day attacks, and we just saw this a month or two ago. Some of our clients still have Exchange on-premise, and Microsoft had detected some unpatched backdoor access to Exchange. It got into the wrong hands, and then it started to be exploited before Microsoft could write the patch. The minute the patch came out, AMP, we were literally patching our customers on a Saturday or Sunday, I forget, but we got it over the weekend, and we immediately patched those on-prem Exchange servers. But nevertheless, they already were being probed. Some of them already had in it software loaded to provide backdoor access. And it's just scary how quickly these things are occurring and how often they're occurring. So there's lots of dangerous IT practices to avoid, and maybe I could have even gone further there. If I back up and just talk about, there are other types of ransomware attacks. You already know about phishing attacks, and there's all sorts of other ways they try to get into your network. But the bottom line is here, they're either attacking your application directly, or they're attacking your end users, trying to get user IDs and passwords so they can get into your network. So there's lots of practices that you can avoid right now, and it's inexpensive to implement these things, and you should be doing it. And if you outsource your IT, you should be talking to your service provider about this. And I guess the first takeaway is, just a couple of years ago, all we said you needed was a firewall. Put firewalls around wherever you have internet coming into your networks and within your company or your branch locations, and keep that firewall software current. Deploy antivirus and malware, keep the virus definition files current, and everything's good to go. Well, that's no longer the case. You also have to pay attention to the operating systems you're using. If you have Windows 7, we even have some customers have manufacturers that are still using XT level code because it's connected to some automated machinery that doesn't have new software supported by new operating systems. So we had to air gap those machines and just literally keep them off the internet. But it's really important that you stay on top of your operating systems, whether server or PC based. Keep them current and keep them patched. It used to be a good practice to delay doing your software updates. Here at AMP, we use quite a few software tools to automate a lot of our service delivery, and we always tried to stay one release behind what was being offered at the time. And we figured, hey, let someone else have the support case when they found a bug with a new piece of software. And that we've thrown that completely out the window. When our vendors now are offering updates, we assume there's something related to security in that update, and we're immediately implementing new software updates on everything we use here. There's no more waiting for a release to come out. It'd be 2 releases behind. Another issue is using weak passwords. And like, for instance, if our company here is called AMP, if I use the password AMP1, or and then the next month when I'm asked to come out with my second password, I do AMP2 and AMP3, AMP4, and so forth. That's a very weak password approach, and could easily be figured out by if someone got my user ID and password and it was a month old, it wouldn't be hard for them to look at that and go, oh, I wonder if there is an AMP4 or an AMP5, and guess their way through to access. And then also, you don't want to ignore authentication requirements. And if your vendors are saying right now you should be implementing multi-factor in front of your line of business software, or there are other recommendations taking place by your vendors, these are things you should be paying attention to. And then finally, you really have to be minding your backups. You need to be testing them, and we're going to go a little deeper into backups in a second. So what are the ways to combat cybercrime today in the modern workplace with everyone working at home remotely? Well, we feel the best way to go about this is to implement a zero trust methodology. And a zero trust methodology, a zero trust stack, essentially has three pillars that make up zero trust. The first is to verify explicitly, and I'm going to dive into each of these so you understand a little more what this means. But the three pillars are verify explicitly, use least privilege access, and then always assume there's going to be a breach. So let's dive in a little bit to each one of them so you understand what this means and why you want to implement it. So verify explicitly. You always want to authenticate and authorize based on all the information that's available at the time someone's trying to log in. And there's a lot of information. And right now, if you're using a local domain, Active Directory as a means of access, there's only two things that domain's looking at: your user ID and password. And unfortunately, there's so many other things available to be looked at. But if you haven't deployed zero trust, and in our case, we use Microsoft 365's zero trust stack to implement all this additional stuff. We're going to show you a demo of it in a second, so you see what it looks like. But we can check out the person's identity. Yes, the user ID and password, like everyone else does with a local Active Directory. But we can also evaluate the user's location. If you have a company of users only working in the Philadelphia area, we can set up a rule that says only PCs in the Philadelphia geography can gain access to the network. And if someone's trying to get in from Colorado or London, they're not going to get in. We can also evaluate when someone logs in. Does the PC or laptop have sufficient device health? More and more, as employees are working from home, they're picking up their iPad or they're picking up their kid's laptop and logging in with that. And if it doesn't have a current antivirus definition file or a firewall turned on it, we can literally block it from coming in, even though the employee's using a browser with a proper user ID and password. And we just don't want uncontrolled devices sitting on your LAN and potentially allowing malware and ransomware to laterally move off that device and into your network. We can also do company data classification. So we can take a look at files that your employees are trying to share or move about and place rules on those files that limit access, where the files go and how they go. And then we can also look at unusual anomalies. I'll give you an example of this. If I've logged in this morning in Philadelphia and I got to work here at 7:30, if someone in Colorado tries to log in at 8:30, well, it would be literally impossible with the laws of physics to travel from Philadelphia out to Denver in an hour. And so this is the kind of data, we call these signals, that are available during the login process to really verify explicitly who's trying to get into your network. And remember, the whole game here with ransomware is that the bad guys, all they need are user ID and password. Microsoft says that people don't break into networks anymore. They just log into them. And the cyber criminals are the same way. Once they have your employee's user ID and password, they try to log in. But using all these additional signals, we can truly verify explicitly a user's access and limit access. The next thing is least privilege access. And the whole idea here is to limit administrative credentials to only those who really need administrative access. And that's typically just a handful of people. Most of your employees here at A&P, we have a bunch of engineers. Some engineers work on network equipment and they have access to all our network tools. We have other engineers here that work on desktop servers and applications, and they have access to those tools. We have folks in here that do accounting. You just met Andrea that does marketing. Andrea has access to the marketing assets, but the engineers can't get into the marketing assets. The engineers can't get into the accounting assets here at AMP. So the whole idea is to determine what the user needs access to and then dial that in, but that's it. Don't let them have access to anything they don't need access to. And the whole idea here is if a bad guy gets in your network, we don't want to give them lateral movement to hop from system to system to system. Makes it easier for them to be able to encrypt data and also snoop around and see what's going on in your network. Finally, assume breach. So what's that mean? Why would you want to assume a breach? Well, unfortunately, the best defense sometimes is a strong offense. And that's what this means. Just anticipate that they're trying to attack you and recognize and acknowledge they're trying to attack you, and then become proactive in how you set up your environment. You want to be able to minimize breach damage, and you do that by contemplating all these changes that we're talking about. And for instance, we can mandate that all the session traffic between you and your servers is always encrypted. And that only happens because we have a private key to share between them. And we can provide analytics to see who is trying to access the network and what user ID and passwords are being used that maybe are coming from over in Asia or over in Russia. And the minute we see that, we turn that user off. We call that user up and say, change your password. And immediately make it so that if something had leaked out somehow and gotten on the dark web or purchased on the dark web, we shut it down by detecting it. And we only do that because we've assumed breach. You know, we're actually looking for people to attack us, and we're recording it when it happens. So all in all, what we're talking about here really is a layered approach to cybersecurity. It's just not one thing. It's a collection of things. And by doing this across your whole digital estate and locking down identities and devices, locking down your applications, locking down your data files, locking down your infrastructure by segmenting your LAN, and locking down your Wi-Fi by the way in which you encrypt the Wi-Fi, turning off all LAN ports that don't have a user on them. There's a lot of things we can do to just continue to make the window and kind of shutting the door tighter and tighter and tighter on the bad guys. And the bad guys are lazy. You know, they want to make easy money. So when they come across your business and you're completely locked down, they're going to recognize that and just move on to an SMB, a small business that has done none of this, where they're easy prey. So you don't have to do a lot to isolate yourself and make yourself look hard to attack. So the number one thing we want you to do, and we feel that zero trust is right at the top, but before you even apply the zero trust principles, the number one thing we want you to do is turn on multi-factor authentication. It's the number one priority. It's not hard to do. It's frankly not that expensive to do. And once you set it up once, you never have to set it up again. And essentially, what is multi-factor? What are we talking about here? Well, you already know your employees need user ID, sometimes their email, sometimes a number, sometimes their initials, and then a password that they had created or was assigned to them. The multi-factor is one more additional thing needed. That's why we call it multi-factor. It's another factor on top of the user ID and password. And passwords are something that you already know. It's something you've memorized in your head. But the other multi-factors that we're going to use are something you either have or something that you are. And when I say something you have, for instance, it's a PIN number that gets texted to your cell phone. So the bad criminal over in Russia that has already bought your user ID and password and normally could get in, once you turn on multi-factor, his authentication request is going to come to your user's phone, and they're going to say disapprove or approve. And if something's coming in and they're not trying to log in, they're going to say disapprove. So that's the whole idea of this extra factor is that by having that third thing that you either have or you are, so have would be like a phone, you have a phone, or something that you are. You could use some biometric thing. On my laptop, I have two biometrics. I have a Lenovo laptop that does an IR scan of my face. And if it sees my face, it'll let me in. I can also put my finger on a fingerprint reader and require both of those, my face and my fingerprint, two biometric factors on top of the user ID and password. So I think you kind of get it here by implementing that extra factor. Even when the bad guys have your user ID and password, they can't get in. And then the holy grail of Zero Trust is to move to passwordless access. So one of the tricky things about that, and we've done this for years, when we get a new client, we'll say, all right, we're going to change your password policies. The passwords now need to be 10 digits long. They need to have a number. They need to have a character. They need to have a letter that's capitalized. And so we call that a complex password. And then we say, every 90 days, you have to change it, that password. And what happens is users are inherently lazy. And so if I had a password of AMP1, the next month, I'm probably going to AMP2 and then AMP3. And so we really want to get away from relying upon users to create similar passwords over and over. And by stopping that requirement, we really can lock things down. And I just told you about on my laptop. On my laptop, I have something called Windows Hello for Business, and with facial recognition. And by turning on these new factors that are available, you can become a passwordless business. You know, if every employee has their face scanned on top of their user ID and password, you've made it a lot harder for anyone to get into the network. And I would say almost impossible, not always impossible, but almost impossible, certainly a lot harder. And like I said, criminals are lazy. They're looking for easy prey. And the minute they see you've implemented some of this stuff, they're going to move on to someone else. So for me at AMP here, we're running a passwordless company. Yes, the domain, I have a password in my domain, and it might ask me to type my password in once every 2 or 3 months just to confirm it's me. But otherwise, it's using all biometrics for me to gain access into the domain. So there's a bunch of user best practices, and we've kind of touched on this because most cyber attacks rely upon humans to do something dumb or stupid. We really want to limit anything that a user could do, and we already talked about not having privileged users or users with admin credentials. Unfortunately, most of the new clients AMP gets are folks that have just been through a ransomware attack, recognize that they need a new source of an IT supplier. They need to really lock things down, and we'll come across small businesses where every employee had admin credentials. So all you needed to do is get a user ID and password from anyone, and then you had the keys to the castle at an administrative level. So this idea of kind of limiting privileged access users is super important. It sounds kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people are not doing it. And then Microsoft calls people that do dumb things problem users. I love that term. At AMP, we call them clickers. So we run out software, and we literally try to test all our employees every month, and by tricking them into doing something stupid. And if someone becomes a clicker and does the stupid thing, they're offered training. And they take the training, they learn not to do it again. But at our stand-up meetings, we always like to announce who the clicker was of the month. And it's kind of a way of public shaming, I guess, maybe kind of a crazy culture, but we all laugh over it. But in many ways, it's not funny, but I think it's really important that you have some kind of social engineering training going on where you're baiting and testing your employees all the time. And then if they do something wrong, immediately throw them into training so that they recognize that they did something wrong. You also want to have strong network security best practices. So this is more of the technical stuff that's under the covers that a company like AMP would do for you. And it's lockdown access to all your TCP/IP ports. It's having those good password hygiene practices. Taking a look at lifecycle management. If you have an old firewall that's more than 5 years old, it's time to get rid of it and update it with something new. or also taking a look at vendor management. And we believe strongly that less vendors in an environment is better than more vendors. And so if you can land on one vendor, for instance, we're a Cisco partner and a Meraki partner. If you can put in a whole Cisco LAN and a whole Cisco Wi-Fi ecosystem, that's way better than deploying an Aruba Wi-Fi with an HPE LAN switch. Trying to have less vendors, the equipment is more tightly integrated, it's easier to secure the equipment, and always trying to get to that lower vendor number is always a good thing, and definitely a best practice. All right, so what are some of the steps to mitigate damage? And let's quickly take a look at this. Well, the first one is be ready for cyber incidents. And again, this is kind of that, assume breach. But now we're doing this more from a perspective of your backups. You need to be able to recover at any moment, at any time, all of your data. And you really need to know, how often do I need to be doing backups so that I can recover quickly? You need to know how long it takes to recover your line of business software or server. And is that period of time okay with you? If you have an old backup product like Backup Exec and you have a SQL database, it could take 2 weeks to rebuild a SQL database using Backup Exec if it wasn't set up properly. And it's a nightmare. And along the way, it could break. There's newer backup software products out there where you can back up a whole line of business software in literally minutes instead of hours or days or weeks. So you really need to understand where you are from a backup and recovery perspective. And then where are you keeping your backups? It's great to have a backup right on your server, because that'll be the fast recovery point if you need it. But you also need to get a batch of your backups out of the building. God forbid the building burns down or there's a flood, but beyond that, just get them away from the hands of the encryptors, of the cybersecurity breach people. And I'll give you an example. We recently heard from a new customer that the backups were fine. Unfortunately, the backups on the server were encrypted, and then they made a gigantic mistake of having a network attached storage device with a USB cable directly connected to the server. And so that set of backups, a redundant set of backups, it was encrypted because the cyber guys saw it and were able to encrypt it. So having a cloud-based backup is really important. And from our perspective, having it in Microsoft Azure is even better, because Microsoft is going to move that backup into 3 different data centers. So even if they have a colossal data center failure, it's still available in 2 other places around the country. So these are the kinds of things you need to think about. I also want you to think about having a cyber incident plan that's written and it's practiced and you understand what to do. So when the minute something gets wonky in your IT, you know what to do, and you're not like scratching your head and wondering, because believe me, when someone's in your network, time is of the essence. The faster you shut things down, the better, okay? And then finally, have a really good cyber insurance policy. We talked about these resilient backups. So you want to be testing your backups at all times. And when I mean test, I mean recover a file and recover a server and make sure the backups are working. You also really want to have good cyber security insurance. Most business owners go out and think, hey, do I need $1 million of ransomware protection or $2 million of ransomware protection? And they're asking the wrong questions. Very rarely do you actually have to pay the ransomware. What's far more likely is that you have a security breach, and we call that a security incident. And in a security incident, you're going to need a forensic security company to come in and evaluate what happened. It's almost like the police detectives showing up after a crime, except forensic security is the detective for a cyber crime. You need legal support so that you can get privileged client status quickly, so you don't have to share anything that you discover with anybody. And you also need to make sure that the policy will pay for any IT remediation. If your servers have to be rebuilt, or your network or your PCs, it's expensive. And it has to be done quickly, so you're probably doing it at nights and weekends, which makes it even more expensive. So having those 3 things evaluated on your policy are important. Do you have a forensics company? Is there legal support? And will they pay for remediation? And then you really want to try to limit the scope of the damage. And so that means constantly assessing when you add a new application or you deprecate an application. Are you on top of keeping your digital estate really clean? And obviously, finally, we want to make it as hard as possible to gain access. And your industry has provided standards for you, and they're different for all sorts of industries, but you want to be on top of what are the best practices in your own industry and then share that with your IT provider and ensure that that's really happening. So let's move on now. I'm going to pass the baton over here to Matt McCarthy. He's our lead cloud architect, and he has a demonstration for you.
Thanks, Dave. And I think you guys should be able to see my screen now, but let me know if you can't, and I'll stop and reshare. So the first thing I wanted to show you guys is what is multi-factor authentication and kind of what it looks like for your users. And it may be something you're familiar with, but let's just kind of show it to you here. And if you're not familiar with it, the example that I generally give is it's kind of like your debit card for your bank. A bank would never issue in a million years a debit card, or hopefully they wouldn't. A debit card that doesn't have a PIN number on it, you would need the physical debit card, and you also need the PIN number to get your money out. Multi-factor authentication is similar to that in that you don't want to give access to the corporate resources, until you have two forms of identification. One being the physical, the debit card in this example, and the other one being what which is the PIN number. So when we were looking originally at this login screen, this is where you would normally go. But let's take a look at what would happen when I tried to log in for the first time. See when I type my password right. It's always a good test. You could see here that I have the password right, but I have to approve an additional sign-in request if I want to get in. And right now my phone's dinging, which ultimately means that there is a prompt on there that I would need to get into if I wanted to get logged in. So even if the hacker, like Dave said, bought my password off the dark web, there is another gap there. Another one of the cool things about this is there is a deny option, like Dave was talking about on the prompt that I just got. If I hit deny at 3 in the morning when my phone wakes me up because someone's logging in as me, we have logic and automation in the platform that will automatically lock my account and force me to reset my password. And the only way I'm going to reset the password is if I can validate who I am through multi-factor. The other thing I wanted to show you just before we go on to the other areas of the demo is if Dave was mentioning passwordless sign-on. So let's just take a look at that real quick right here. So say I went back to that website again, office.com, and I went to sign in. So a new user gets, or the hacker gets in, or one of your users, they put in their email address. It says, what's your password? There's other ways to sign in here at the bottom. So there's all different options, all the methods that I've enrolled. But the passwordless version is approve a request on my Authenticator app. And you can see here that, it will ask me to go to my Authenticator app, hit the number 16 on the Authenticator app, and then presumably it would log me in here. Now, at AMP, we have an additional set of authentications where even though I just approved this sign-on, it's going to prevent me from getting there because I'm coming from a non-compliant device. So security is all about layering your solutions for security. So even if my password gets compromised, somehow there's a nation state attack and they can compromise multi-factor authentication, there's still another layer in here where you have to be coming from a compliant device. So that's kind of what multi-factor look like in a nutshell, and the different types that are available. The next thing I wanted to show you guys what kind of features you have when you enroll your device in Intune and with Defender ATP. So let's take a look at that portal. This is the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. And you can see here, we're actually looking at one of our AMP engineers' machines. And the engineer in question, if you know him, is Phil. So if you do have one of his tickets, give him a hard time about this, but not too difficult of a time ultimately. But this is a real example of a problem that we had with Phil's machine. You could see in here we have alerts that come up for his machine, a timeline of all events for his machine, which I will go back to, a list of security recommendations, all the software that's installed on the machine, vulnerabilities that are on the machine, and any missing patches. I also have the ability to restrict certain apps from running AV scans, and isolating the device immediately from the network just by clicking this button. I know Phil's working, so I won't do that right now. But let's go into the Discovered Vulnerabilities tab. And you can see it automatically lists several vulnerabilities on Phil's machine that we need to remediate. And these are vulnerabilities that aren't even in just the Microsoft ecosystem. So for example, if we click into this critical vulnerability at the top, you can see here that it's picking up an outdated version of 7-zip on his machine. I asked Phil to leave this on his machine as an example, but you can see that it actually detects not just Microsoft software, but all software on the machine, and kind of gives you a full view of what's on the machine and what's vulnerable. It's not just looking at. The next thing in this platform that I wanted to show you is the timeline. So if we click into the timeline, it's going to take a few seconds to load, so just be patient here. But what this is at a high level is pretty much every click and every view of what every service did on your machine. So for the last, just scrolling down here from what you're seeing, me scrolling here, this has been about halfway down this page. That's only gone back 20 minutes. So this is logging every connection that Phil's web browser makes, every token that his team's client receives or doesn't receive, everything that his Outlook connects to. And why this is useful, and we'll kind of see it later in the demo here, but it allows you to really have a good understanding of what happens when a breach occurs or when a breach potentially occurs. And what I mean by that is, previously in IT, and I've been doing this for a little while, but in the early days of doing this, you'd get a user who clicked on an email, and you would say, oh, what did that user do? Did they actually click on it? Did it get forwarded? What happened on the machine after they clicked on it? You go to the event logs, and the event logs only go back 3 hours because no one configured retention. Or the user was off the network and they couldn't get back to your security appliance on site, so it never got aggregated up, and that retention was lost. All of these logs are being sent to Microsoft without a VPN, without any interaction with any network. Phil's working out of his home office today, and all of these logs are getting there no matter where he's working. So he could be at a Starbucks when a security event happens. He could be on our corporate network when a security event happens, and we would know about it. And that's really important, because if an issue does happen off network, you want to make sure that device doesn't come back on your network. So having this level of logging and being able to click into any of these things and flag them as important or not important really helps in the incident response side of things. The next thing I want to look at was alerts. So there is an alert on Phil's machine that I haven't dismissed yet for the purposes of kind of showing you guys. So let's let this load here, and we'll click into the alert and see what kind of information is available to us. So you can see here there was an Okami malware on Phil's machine, and we can click into it to get a lot more detail about exactly what happened. So it says here on 6/23/2021, Phil's Explorer process at 1:50 p.m. listed in his file browser a keygen for vCenter. And if you're not familiar with what a keygen is, it's, if you pirate software, if you download pirated software, you may not have a key for that software that you're pirating. So you would run a keygen utility on your computer to get a key generated for you. Sounds really great, but generally speaking, if you're running these things, hackers know that the person who's going to download a vCenter keygen is most likely going to be an administrator. And that's where they're going to put their malware on. So the Okami malware isn't a serious infection. And this is probably ultimately a false positive, and I can show you how I got to that. But our solution did find it and fix it immediately. So let's take a look at this. We could see in the bottom right-hand corner here, down here, that it was automatically prevented. The alert was generated on June 24th, 2021 at 4 p.m. The times are a little bit off just because of UTC to Eastern Time translation. But the main point to really get here is we're in September. I'm able to see this alert from June in September with this level of granularity. And I could see everything that happened. So let's looking at this, we could say, okay, at 1:50 p.m., the first time the Explorer process listed this file, it was scanned, it detected something, and it prevented it. And what that means is it deleted the file. The interesting thing is Phil's a tinkerer. He has his own home network. He has his own home lab. He has racks of servers in his basement. So it actually detected this file on his NAS in his basement that he had a connection open to grab an ISO off. In that 1 or 2 minutes that he opened up a browser to this NAS at his house, it scanned the entirety of his NAS, found this file, and cleaned it off. Looking at it, you can see down here that afterwards it found the malware. The next thing it said that that Edge launched, and then down here, this would be really suspicious. What this is saying is that his machine tried to connect to another machine in the office, and then a few minutes later, tried to connect to another machine in his office. Now, because I know Phil has a lab, and I've already verified with this, he was working on this at 8 o'clock at night and spinning up VMs to build in his lab. And these were legitimate. But if this was Debbie from accounting, who has no idea what remote desktop is, and we saw 2 or 3 connections coming from a machine to other machines in your network, it would be a completely different story. And having this knowledge or having this detail allows me to make educated decisions to know if someone's compromised. Do I have to wipe the machine? Was it a malicious event, or was this just a gray kind of infection? And beyond that, I can continue to scroll down just to kind of look in the next couple of days. Did anything happen that was strange? And really, other than a few connections here or there and Phil's desktop software that he runs, there really isn't anything that really concerns me. So, this is one of those ones that we could go in here and classify as a true alert. And then Microsoft would use that to improve their analytics. And the next time this happens, it would trigger off more immediately. And if you wanted to, you can scroll down here. It does give you a lot of information about what the alert is, what the recommended actions are. As part of A&P service, we manage all this for you. But this is the kind of granularity and the detail that we get when we manage these things as they're happening in your environment. And again, this is all cloud-based, so there is no need to have a local network or anything like that. The next thing I wanted to show you guys is Azure Sentinel. And what I reference Azure Sentinel as is kind of, there's a lot of different watchtowers in Microsoft 365 and in your environment. So that could be your Meraki portal, that could be your backup appliance that's not a Microsoft appliance, let's say. It could be your switches, your sysllogs, all the event logs from your workstations, all of these different things. They're all independent systems and they all put their hand up independently. What Sentinel is a unified aggregation for all of those logs in a single pane of glass that allows us to implement automation. So if an alert comes up in Defender that Phil clicked on a spoof email, I can have Sentinel go to every user's mailbox in our organization and proactively delete that message. On the flip side, if Meraki detects some kind of vulnerable device or some kind of vulnerable condition or indication of compromise, I could actually use Sentinel to go to that user's machine and lock them out. And that's just one piece of Sentinel. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about it. But the main thing of this is that it is not really anything on its own, but it is a central pane of management that all of your individual watchtowers kind of report back into. So let's look at an event. This is one that I generated for the purpose of this demo, but you can see there's other ones in here, and some of them are kind of scary, and some of them aren't. Files containing PHI. I've looked into these. These are the people who should be sharing them, so they aren't really super concerning to me. But if I did see, for example, one of our engineers, and this has happened, putting their 401k or W-2 in the wrong spot, I can use that as a training exercise. The Sentinel will still pick that up. We'll still let an administrator know or a compliance officer know. And then I can use that information to, like Dave said, identify problem users and train them. So it's not just for indications of compromise or breach. It's also for things like your data loss prevention platform firing off or your compliance or regulation requirements firing off. It aggregates everything in here. And that's what kind of makes it a full featured security product. So getting back to this example, this is what would normally be a terrifying thing if I didn't really know what it was, but it says that there was an administrative activity from a non-corporate IP address involving one user. And what that means is that it's noticing an admin doing activity outside of our network. I can click into this alert here. I can see that it was my M. McCarthy admin account. I can see right here from this one click, what IP was involved and that it was the Cloud App for Security portal. Knowing what I know, if I was, an incident response or on the NOC team that monitors this for our clients, I would say, okay, I know that this is Matt McCarthy's test IP, so I don't need to worry about it. And we can create automation around these. So if this alert comes in with this IP address, it would be excluded but logged from being alerted. But let's go into the assumption that we need more detail on this, and we gotta kind of figure out what this is. So to do that, we're gonna open up the alert like we did, and then we're gonna go down here to view full details, and we're gonna click on that. So when that loads, you see it's kind of an explosion of that little pane of glass that we were looking at previously, and we have up top here the ability to look at the timeline. So if there was multiple instances of this alert, it would aggregate them all together so I can make a decision based off of all the alerts. In this example, this is really just the one thing that I purposely fired off. So there really isn't going to be more of them. But if there was, you could use that in your incident response, or AMP would use that in their incident response if we were managing this for you to make a really good educated decision. Alerts, again, is similar alerts. It will list all the alerts here, kind of not in a timeline format, but it shows you a lot of detail for it, and any playbooks or automation associated with those alerts. Bookmarks, if you wanted, if one of the guys on my NOC team, or if I wanted to attach a bookmark or a KB to every time this alert fires off, I could do that here. Entities is just kind of, like I said, an explosion of this entities panel down here, where it shows you the everyone who's involved, and you can click into them to get more detail. And then the comments, if people wanted to have a chat, if we were communicating with a client, comments are really important for your auditors. They like to see, the full life cycle of what happened with that vulnerability and what notes were made or not made. So rather than being in a disconnected system, your auditor could get in here and see all the comments and why, or the who, what, when, where, and why on how something was resolved. But this still doesn't really give me, let's say I kind of recognize the IP, but I'm not totally clear because it's assumed this isn't mine. And I want to just get a little bit more information before I rule this off as a false positive. So what I'm going to do down here is click on investigate. And that gives you a really rich spider chart and the ability to kind of expand each one of these entities that I was referencing earlier to get a little bit more detail. So you can see here that everything's connected with a red line, and red means critical. It's generally a bad thing if you see red, and that applies here. But let's look at the Matt McCarthy admin account. And this little pop-up here gives me the ability to expand any related alerts that this account had. So let's look at, so was there any other alerts here that occurred on the Matt McCarthy admin account? So it says here that there was an unusual addition of credentials, that the Matt McCarthy admin account did some weird SharePoint operations. There were some rare and potentially unusual connections, and that I configured new access credentials into the tenant. Now, if I was an incident response person, this would terrify me if this wasn't an example, but this would be, okay, this seems suspicious. Matt McCarthy did something that he doesn't normally do from an IP address. Did he do anything else that was suspicious? Okay, yeah, he added an unusual credential. And again, I can go ahead and I can click into this and see anything that's related to this alert and kind of get a full picture of exactly what happened with all that level of logging that goes back months and months and months that I referred to earlier, all in one single pane of glass, and I can see exactly what the person did or what they didn't do, because not every indication of compromise is a breach, and it's just as important to be able to rule out the false positives. I could see, the times the account has successfully logged on, the times that the account has failed logons. I could see what host the account logged into. If they made any connections from rare IPs, I can even see if they took a screenshot while they were logged in and what they took screenshots of, to look for data exfiltration. And there's all sorts of different things. But the important thing is I can also see that they didn't take a screenshot. Right here, that they said there was there's a 0 next to it. So I could say, it doesn't look like any data was exfiltrated. It doesn't look like they spread to any other IPs or that they created any services while they were logged in. But these other things are suspicious. Let me talk to Matt, and I talked to Matt, and he said that he did add these access credentials for a line of business that he was testing, and he was doing these things for SharePoints for a proof of concept for another client. So normally you kind of have to play the guessing game to know what happens, and the whole point of this is Sentinel will give you the ability to know exactly what's happening, and it also allows you to build automation around it. So all of your logs will be there forever. And they're stored in Azure for an indefinitely long time, based on your retention periods that we all set up and manage for you. And this is all stuff that we do for people as part of our secure cloud offering. And it really is a great tool that allows you to have a full idea of what's going on in your environment, and more importantly, maybe what's not going on in your environment. So that's Sentinel at a high level. I covered the MFA today, the Windows Defender Security, which kind of integrates into Microsoft Endpoint Management, and the Defender ATP licensing. And then the last thing I showed you guys was Intune, was Sentinel. So covered a lot, but only covered a little of each topic. And if there's anything else you guys want or more clarification on, just reach out and I'd be more than happy to show you more or drill into any of these topics in more detail. So I'm going to go back to you, Dave. But that's all I have in terms of the demo.
All right, great job, Matt. Thank you so much for sharing that information. So you can see here the level of sophistication sitting underneath all of Microsoft's security products. And I think what's interesting here is we just kind of showed you under the covers a little of this, but what's really valuable and what I want you to take away is that you never really have to worry about that as a client. That's something that AMP does. We have a managed service called Secure Cloud Advantage that really manages everything underneath that 365 security stack. We implement the Zero Trust 3 principles, multi-factor for you. We'll manage your cloud-based backups. We'll take care of all the security alert and monitoring, and we'll give you a cyber incident written plan so you know what to do when things get wonky. But your own provider hopefully has the same kind of solution for you. What we want to emphasize is that everything that Matt shows you, if we weren't using Microsoft, we could have gone out and bought 30 or 40 different security products and knitted them all together that would give us some fashion of this. And we see a lot of businesses doing that, picking this, picking that, and trying to connect them together. And one of the things we love about Microsoft 365 is how highly integrated it is, how it shows up in just a couple of portals. And it's just so much easier to manage when it's a single vendor solution. AMP has a whole dedicated team of Microsoft Cloud experts here. We also have Cisco and Meraki experts to handle all of the networking infrastructure issues. We have virtual CIOs that can provide strategic planning for you and help you create an IT roadmap and create a budget. We can also help you with lifecycle management of all of your infrastructure equipment. And hey, when's it time to upgrade and put that in the budget and be prepared for that. And then we can also provide you with online user training. And as Matt shared, we have a network operations center running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We have some large enterprise customers in Philadelphia here, as well as many small and medium businesses. So just a couple takeaways for you today to ponder. And that's just bear in mind that your business is under cyber attack all the time. And they're constantly trying to trick your employees into giving up their user IDs and passwords. And that old way of securing your business and thinking that, hey, I have intrusion protection or I have a firewall turned on, that's just not good enough any longer, because all the attacks that are taking place are going right through those products and aiming at your end users via email. And security is not a set it and forget it practice any longer. It's a full-time job, and you need to make sure you've hired someone either on your own team or as a third-party service provider to help you stay on top of this. And I really want to encourage you to take the stance that you assume a breach is going to take place and that you're prepared for the breach. Prevention and resolution is just equally as important. And once you assume breach, it's easy to get in that mindset of, hey, how do I prevent and what do I proactively do to resolve issues? And we talked a little bit about that layered defense, that it's not one thing, but it's a whole host of things that help lock your business down. And if you don't have a cyber insurance policy, I'm looking at the names on that attended the webinar here, and I think I know many of you, and I think you do have it. But if you don't, go buy it. And hey, we're here to help. Anything we can do to help you, we'd love to do that. If your cybersecurity is up to par, my hat off to you. If you'd like to talk to us for 30 minutes, we'd love to do that. And we also have a cybersecurity assessment report that we'd be willing to provide to you. That it's yours for free, whether we do business or not in the future. If you'd like us to evaluate kind of your own provider today and what's going on. So thank you so much, Andrea. I'm going to toss it back to you. And Andrea, I apologize. We're like 8 minutes long here today. But I'm going to throw it back to you. Hey, thanks so much to everyone for coming and joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Dave and Matt. A lot of great content there, and yeah, I do recognize that we're a little over time here, so I just have a couple quick questions I want to get through. If you can hang in with us, and we'll wrap up. So the first one is, do these security tools work only for Microsoft 365, or can we apply them to our in-house and hosted data as well?
So I could take that one. We can integrate, specifically with Sentinel. So the first tool I showed you was Defender. That is for workstations. It will look at servers. It will give you recommendations on servers. But really, Sentinel and all the logs and analytics you get from that can be done in Azure and on site. There is a utility we can apply to on-site resources that will take all of the logs and detail from those resources if they're a Windows server and ship them up to Sentinel. If there's something like your networking equipment or something at an office or a fabrication machine that's spitting out some kind of syslog, that can also be sent up regardless if it's cloud aware or not.
Okay, great. And in terms of, can you give us a little bit of insight into what it would cost to implement this package of security tools?
Okay, Matt, I'll take that one. I would say on average, it's about $13 per month for a managed service for us to take care of Microsoft's backend security portal per user, Andrea. Everyone's mileage may vary. The larger you are, the less it is per user. But I think that's fair.
Okay, great. All right, great. Well, I will be sending out a follow-up email, including a survey asking for your feedback and how, so that we can see how we did today. If you could just take a moment to fill that out, it would be great to help us improve these events. And again, we highly recommend you take advantage of that free assessment while you can. If this is of interest, you can email connect@amp.net or note it in the survey follow-up and we will reach out. So that's it for today. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Hey, Andrea, Matt, great job. Thank you.